Donald Trump is back, and with him, a storm of new policies reshaping America's global standing. From hardline tariffs to military threats and a revived America First agenda, allies and rivals alike are recalibrating their ties with Washington. As the world watches, some of America's closest partners are slowly backing away, forming new alliances, expanding regional trade, and asserting independence. In this video, we explore 10 countries now shifting course, either out of necessity, strategy, or survival. Is this the beginning of a global power realignment? Country 1. Mexico. The U.S.-Mexico relationship is under serious strain. In early 2025, Trump announced a sweeping 30% tariff on all Mexican imports, blaming Mexico for the fentanyl crisis and border security gaps. Mexico's new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, pushed back strongly. She emphasized that Mexico will not tolerate violations of its sovereignty, especially not through foreign troops or economic coercion. While both countries continue talks to avoid full-scale damage, Mexico is taking action, boosting its own border security, investing in Latin American trade, and deepening ties with Brazil and Argentina. The message is clear: Mexico is no longer willing to be taken for granted. Country 2. Canada. Canada was blindsided when Trump raised tariffs on Canadian imports from 25% to 35%, despite recent concessions like scrapping the controversial digital tax. Prime Minister Mark Carney responded swiftly, pledging to defend Canadian workers and industries. With new tariffs targeting cars, oil, and even hydroelectric power, Canada's reliance on U.S. trade is becoming a vulnerability. Behind the scenes, Ottawa is expanding partnerships in Europe and the Asia-Pacific to reduce dependence on American markets. The once stable North American Trade Pact is beginning to crack under pressure, and Canada may be rethinking its future in Trump's economic orbit. Country 3. Germany. Germany, Europe's largest economy, is bracing for impact. With over €160 billion worth of exports to the US annually, Trump's 30% tariff threat has alarmed Berlin. German leaders, including Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil, have called on the European Union to prepare strong countermeasures. They argue that Trump's policies could severely damage global supply chains and hurt both sides of the Atlantic. Europe is waiting, hoping for dialogue, but has quietly reactivated retaliatory tariff frameworks just in case. Germany isn't just protecting its economy, it's standing up for a broader European resistance to Trump's economic nationalism. Country 4. France. France has gone on the offensive. Trade officials in Paris have urged the European Union to use every legal tool available to counter Trump's aggressive tariffs. They are particularly vocal about applying the EU's anti-coercion instrument to American digital and service industries. At the same time, France is accelerating trade diversification, signing new deals with African, Middle Eastern, and Asian partners, particularly in green energy and high-tech. President Emmanuel Macron has remained diplomatic in tone, but his administration's actions signal a deeper intent: to make France and the EU less vulnerable to American pressure in a Trump-led world. Country 5. China. The U.S.-China rivalry has entered a new phase. Trump's 2025 tariffs now average over 50% on Chinese imports, sparking an immediate response from Beijing. China raised duties on U.S. goods to as high as 84%, condemned Trump's actions as bullying, and issued travel advisories warning its citizens about tensions with the United States. But China is not just retaliating, it's adapting. Chinese firms are doubling down on trade with Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. They're moving supply chains out of the US, and in some cases, out of China altogether to avoid being caught in a permanent trade war. The decoupling is no longer theoretical, it's happening now. Country 6. India. India's approach is more nuanced. Despite new American tariffs on certain Indian products, Prime Minister Narendra Modi continues to engage with Trump. He's praised the America First doctrine and has made small trade concessions, including cutting tariffs on bourbon and motorcycles. But behind the diplomacy, India is hedging. It's expanding ties with China and the BRICS bloc, strengthening trade with Africa and the Middle East, and positioning itself as a third global pole alongside the US and China. India's long-term strategy is clear: work with America where possible, but never depend on it. Country 7. Brazil. Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, found himself at odds with Trump after calling him an unwanted emperor during a regional summit. Trump responded with a 50% tariff on Brazilian exports. Markets in Brazil reacted sharply, stocks tumbled, the currency dropped, and major firms saw losses. Lula's government denounced the tariffs as political punishment and quickly moved to strengthen regional alliances. Brazil is now deepening economic ties with Mercosur, China, and African markets, hoping to lessen its economic vulnerability. For Latin America's biggest player, Trump's trade war may have triggered a long overdue pivot towards self-reliance. Country 8. South Korea. South Korea is urgently trying to renegotiate its trade terms with the US to avoid a 25% tariff that's set to kick in. President Lee Jae-myung's administration has offered concessions, including new agricultural imports, but insists the US must remove Trump-era steel and auto duties. While South Korea remains a key US ally in security matters, its industries are beginning to look eastward. Korean automakers and electronics firms are increasing investments in China, India, and Southeast Asia to diversify risks. Seoul is still loyal to Washington, but it's preparing for a future where that loyalty can no longer be taken for granted. Country 9. Turkey. Turkey continues its balancing act between East and West. Although US sanctions over Turkey's purchase of Russian missile systems remain in place, hopes were briefly raised when a Trump advisor suggested Erdogan and Trump trust each other. Ankara has demanded reentry into the F-35 fighter jet program, calling its exclusion unjust. But Turkey is not waiting idly. It's expanding partnerships with Russia and China while also negotiating new trade deals with Europe. Turkey is still officially in NATO, but its recent moves suggest a nation repositioning itself for a more independent and Eurasian future. Country 10. South Africa. Trump's new 30% tariff on South African citrus, wine, and beef has sparked outrage. The policy was reportedly justified by false claims Trump made about white genocide in the country, a conspiracy theory with no basis in fact. President Cyril Ramaphosa tried to calm tensions in Washington, but stood his ground, stressing South Africa's progress since apartheid and calling for mutual respect. In response, South Africa is deepening trade within Africa, pushing continental payment systems and exploring alternatives to the US dollar. Trump's rhetoric may have backfired, accelerating South Africa's efforts to trade in local currencies and assert regional leadership. From North America to Africa, from Asia to Europe, the world is changing. Trump's return has reignited debates about sovereignty, fairness, and America's role in the global economy. While some nations still hope for compromise, others are actively moving on, building new alliances, protecting their industries, and pushing back against what they see as economic coercion. Whether this is a temporary reaction or a permanent shift remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, the global order is no longer US-centric, and Trump's policies may be accelerating that change. Stay tuned with the Discovery Trail for more untold stories and deep geopolitical insights. Subscribe now, because understanding the world is more important than ever.